My name is Caleb Hayes, and I was 19 when I learned that some families do not need proof to throw you away. The night it happened, the power had already flickered twice under the heavy Texas storm. My phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, and my heavy canvas work bag was resting by the stairs because I thought I was only coming home from a long shift at the auto shop, not leaving my entire life behind. My brother Derek had said one sentence, just one, and suddenly every drop of sweat, every honest hour I had ever worked, and every good thing I had ever done in that house meant absolutely nothing. I grew up in a sprawling suburb in Texas, in a house that looked perfectly respectable from the street. We had a wide driveway, a manicured lawn that my father obsessed over, and a garage filled with expensive tools. If you drove past us on a Sunday afternoon, you would have thought we were just another hard-working, blue-collar family trying to build a legacy, pay the bills, and eat dinner together like everyone else. But inside those walls, there was a silent, suffocating rule that nobody ever dared to say out loud. My older brother, Derek, was the golden future, and I was the designated problem. I was the quiet one. I spent my days covered in motor oil and grease, working part-time at a local, rundown auto repair shop. I loved the smell of gasoline and the honest weight of a wrench in my hand. I spent my weekends crawling under old rusted chassis, fixing transmissions, and saving every single dollar I made. I had a singular focus, my college fund. I was determined to study mechanical engineering, to build a life out of my own raw effort. Every paycheck went straight into a high-yield savings account that I checked religiously. It was my ticket out, my sweat equity, my proof that I was worth something. My father, Richard, owned a mid-sized residential construction and roofing company. He was the kind of man who measured a person's worth by how loud they talked and how heavily they stepped. He was a proud man, proud of his calloused hands, his branded company trucks, and the fact that he was the guy people called when their roofs caved in after a summer squall. He liked being the savior of broken houses, but he never seemed to care about the broken foundation inside his own home. My mother, Susan, worked from the kitchen island, handling all the billing, the invoices, and the messy paperwork for my father's company. She was always surrounded by stacks of receipts and half-empty mugs of cold coffee. She was organized with her spreadsheets, but emotionally, she was entirely subservient to my father's moods and my brother's whims. And then there was Derek. Derek was 24, loud, charismatic, and entirely useless. He worked for my father as a junior project supervisor, a completely fabricated title that allowed him to drive a company truck, carry a company credit card, and spend his afternoons drinking with contractors instead of actually inspecting job sites. He showed up late, lost important client files, mismanaged project timelines, and routinely forgot to log material expenses. Yet, my father would just clap him on the back, laugh it off, and say he was learning the ropes of becoming a real man. Whenever I brought up my own plans, the atmosphere in the room would drop. My father would look at my grease-stained fingernails with absolute disgust. I remember one evening, I was excitedly talking about the engineering program I was applying to. My father didn't even look up from his dinner plate. He just pointed his fork at me and delivered a line that I have never forgotten. "Greasy hands don't build a legacy, Caleb," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Look at your brother. He's out there managing men, shaking hands, building the family name. You're just hiding under cars like a rat. Engineering. You're going to be a glorified oil changer for the rest of your life." I remember a specific Tuesday afternoon about 6 months before the storm. I was in the driveway, scrubbing the grease off my arms with heavy-duty soap. Derek pulled up in his brand-new 2024 Ford F-250 company truck. He parked haphazardly, practically tearing up the grass. When he got out, I immediately noticed a massive, deep scratch running along the entire rear passenger side bumper, with the taillight cracked and hanging by a wire. He had clearly sideswiped a concrete pillar or another vehicle. Derek saw me looking at it. Panic flashed in his eyes for a fraction of a second, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating glare. Before I could even ask what happened, my father walked out of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes locked onto the damaged truck, and his face turned crimson. "What the hell happened to the new rig?" my father roared, marching toward the vehicle. Without missing a beat, without a single stutter, Derek pointed directly at me. "I told Caleb to be careful. He was moving his stupid dirt bike out of the garage and he completely lost control of it. Rammed right into the side of the truck. I yelled at him, 'Dad,' but he just ignored me." I froze. I didn't even own a dirt bike. I had sold it 2 years ago to put the money into my college fund. "Dad, that's insane," I stammered, stepping forward. "I don't even have a bike anymore. I've been at the shop all day. Look at my hands. I just got off work." My father didn't look at my hands. He didn't check the garage for a phantom motorcycle. He didn't ask for a shred of logic. He just marched right up to me, his chest puffed out, breathing heavily through his nose. "You careless, jealous little punk," he spat. "You can't stand that your brother has real responsibilities, can you? You're going to work off every single dime it takes to fix this." When I tried to defend myself again, my mother hurried out of the house. Did she tell my father that I didn't own a bike? No. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin, and pulled me back. "Just let it go, Caleb," she hissed in a frantic whisper. "He's stressed about a big contract. Don't make your brother look bad in front of your father. Just apologize and keep the peace." I was forced to pay $700 out of my own pocket to fix a truck I hadn't touched, all to protect the golden child's ego. A month later, a company credit card went missing. My mother was frantic, tearing the home office apart. The card had over $3,000 in unauthorized charges at high-end sports bars and a local casino over the weekend. I had spent that entire weekend pulling a double shift at the garage, covered in transmission fluid. Yet, at Sunday dinner, Derek casually mentioned that he saw me sneaking around the home office late on Friday night. I was grounded, threatened with police action by my own father, and treated like a convicted felon in my own home. My mother simply cried and asked where she went wrong with me. These weren't just simple lies to escape punishment. As I watched Derek over the years, I realized something deeply disturbing about my brother's psychology. He didn't just lie out of fear of my father's wrath. He lied because he enjoyed it. He lied because watching me get punished, watching me scream in frustration while nobody believed me, gave him a profound sense of power. It made him feel like a god in our little suburban kingdom. He knew my father wanted to believe he had raised a strong, perfect heir. Believing me would mean my father had to admit he had raised a manipulative, degenerate liar. So, my father always chose the easier story. I got home around 8 p.m., soaked to the bone, smelling of exhaust and stale coffee. I left my heavy canvas work bag by the stairs and immediately went upstairs to take a hot shower to scrub the day's grime off my skin. I left my phone charging on the bathroom sink. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have fathomed in my darkest nightmares, was that Derek was watching my every move. He had spiraled deep into an underground sports betting ring over the past few months. He owed dangerous people a lot of money, and his debts were coming due. $5,000 wasn't going to cut it. He needed a massive payout, and he needed a scapegoat. While I was under the hot water, the bathroom door creaked open. Derek slipped in, completely silent. He grabbed my phone. He knew my passcode. He had shoulder-surfed me weeks ago. But he didn't just snoop. He opened my banking app. He knew all about my college fund. He had mocked me for it relentlessly. He saw the balance. Exactly $15,450. 3 years of blood, sweat, burns, and skipped lunches. With practiced, ruthless precision, Derek initiated a wire transfer. He moved every single penny, all $15,450, into an untraceable offshore crypto wallet account that his bookies used. He wiped my account down to zero. Then, to twist the knife and build his alibi, he drafted a fake text message on my phone and sent it to an unsaved burner number. I got the money. I took the cash from the kitchen and drained my account. Just keep them off my back. I don't want to get hurt. He deleted the outbound record, but left the drafted ghost text in my cache. He placed the phone exactly where he found it and slipped out. 10 minutes later, I walked downstairs, drying my hair with a towel. The house was dead silent, save for the thunder crashing outside. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. Suddenly, my father burst through the front door, soaking wet from checking the perimeter of the house. My mother was standing by the kitchen desk, her face pale as a sheet. The drawer was yanked open. The lock was broken. The envelope was gone. "Where is it?" my father boomed, his voice shaking the glassware in the cabinets. "Where is the deposit?" Derek rushed into the room, his face a perfect mask of manufactured panic. He pointed a shaking finger right at my chest. "It was him, Dad. I saw Caleb creeping around the desk right before he went upstairs. He was acting super paranoid." "What?" I sputtered, dropping my towel. "I just got out of the shower. I don't even know what you're talking about. Don't lie to us," Derek screamed, his voice cracking with fake emotion. He lunged forward and snatched my phone off the kitchen counter where I had just set it down. "Look at his phone. He's been texting some shady people all week. Look." Derek expertly opened the cached messages and shoved the screen into my father's face. My father's eyes scanned the fake message. The color drained from his face, replaced instantly by a violent, blinding rage. "Dad, I didn't write that," I yelled, stepping forward. I grabbed my phone back and my heart stopped. I immediately opened my banking app, a sickening dread washing over me. The loading circle spun. Then the balance appeared on the screen. $0. My lungs seized. The room spun. $15,000. My tuition. My way out. My entire life's work. Gone in the span of a 10-minute shower. I dropped to my knees, staring at the screen, unable to breathe. "My money?" I gasped, tears of pure shock welling in my eyes. "My college fund. It's gone. He stole it. He stole everything." I pointed at Derek, my hand trembling violently, but it was too late. The trap had been sprung, and the jaws had snapped shut around my neck. I looked up from the glowing screen of my phone, my vision blurring with panicked tears. I expected my parents to see the utter devastation on my face. I expected my father to grab the phone, to call the bank, to launch an investigation, to demand answers. I expected my mother to hold me as I realized my entire future had just been erased. Instead, I was met with a wall of pure, unadulterated hatred. My father's face had twisted into a mask of absolute disgust. He didn't ask for my side of the story. He didn't ask to see the bank statements. He didn't question how a kid who spent his entire life under the hoods of cars suddenly had a secret drug debt. He looked at the fake text message Derek had planted. He looked at my empty bank account, and he made his judgment. "You sick, degenerate piece of trash," my father growled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, quiet fury. He took a step toward me, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. "You steal from my clients? You steal from this family? To pay off some street thugs because you're a junkie? I'm not," I screamed, my voice cracking, desperation clawing at my throat. "Dad, please look at the transfer logs. Look at the IP address. Derek was in the bathroom. He took the cash. He transferred my money. He set this up." "Shut your mouth," my mother shrieked. She stepped out from behind the kitchen island, her eyes wild, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Don't you dare blame your brother for your disgusting choices. Derek works hard for this family. You've always been jealous of him, you've always tried to ruin him. But this is unforgivable." My father didn't hesitate. He grabbed me by the collar of my shirt, his massive, calloused hands hauling me to my feet. He dragged me through the hallway like a stray dog. I struggled, begging, pleading for them to just call the police, to let the authorities trace the money. But my father wasn't listening to logic. He was acting on years of conditioned bias. He needed me to be the villain so Derek could remain the hero. He reached the front door, threw the deadbolt open, and shoved me out onto the porch. The storm was at its peak. The rain was blowing sideways, stinging my face like icy needles. Thunder rattled the floorboards beneath my feet. My father turned back inside, grabbed my heavy canvas work bag, the one containing a few grease-stained shirts and my work boots, and hurled it out into the darkness. It landed in a deep puddle with a sickening splash. I waited for 10 minutes. The porch light flicked off. They had plunged me into total darkness. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I didn't pound on the door. I didn't scream for forgiveness for a crime I didn't commit. I realized that crying would destroy me, and if I started, I might never stop. I walked down the steps, picked up my soaked bag, and walked away into the storm. The cold was absolute. It wasn't just the temperature of the rain. It was a deep, paralyzing chill that seeped into my bones, born from the realization that my own flesh and blood had discarded me like garbage. There is a very specific, suffocating kind of shame that comes with being thrown out by your own parents. Even when you know with absolute certainty that you did nothing wrong, a dark, insidious voice in the back of your mind whispers that maybe you are fundamentally broken. Maybe everyone who looks at you can see the invisible brand on your forehead that says unwanted. I walked aimlessly at first. The streets of our suburban neighborhood, usually so familiar and safe, had transformed into a hostile landscape of rushing water and violently swaying oak trees. I trudged through ankle-deep water, the heavy canvas bag digging into my shoulder. I had no cash. I had no credit cards. My bank account, the one I had poured 3 years of my life into, was sitting at zero. I had absolutely nothing. I walked for 8 agonizing blocks. The wind whipped my wet clothes against my skin, and my teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. I pulled my phone from my pocket, shielding it from the rain with my body. The battery icon was flashing red. 5%. I had minutes before I was completely cut off from the world. My fingers were so numb and stiff from the cold that I could barely hit the keys. I couldn't call the police. Without proof, it would be my word against my prominent, respected father and my lying brother. I couldn't call my extended family. My mother had likely already called them to spin the narrative of the thieving, drug-addicted son. I opened my contacts and found the only person I trusted in the world. Marcus. Marcus was my best friend. He was a tough, no-nonsense guy who worked the graveyard shift at a massive 24/7 truck stop and diner right off the interstate, about 2 miles away. It was a gritty place, bathed in the glow of flickering neon signs, filled with exhausted long-haul truckers and people running from bad decisions. I typed a desperate, fragmented text. Kicked out. Derek stole everything. I have nothing. Please help me. I hit send just as the screen glitched and went entirely black. The phone was dead. I didn't know if the message had gone through. I just put my head down and forced my legs to keep moving toward the highway. The 2-mile walk felt like a marathon. By the time the towering, illuminated sign of the truck stop came into view through the sheets of rain, I was barely conscious. I was shivering so violently that I couldn't walk in a straight line. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the diner. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the low hum of conversation and the clatter of silverware. The air inside hit me like a physical wall. It smelled of strong, burnt coffee, fryer grease, and diesel exhaust. Marcus was behind the counter, wiping down the laminate surface. He took one look at me standing in the doorway, dripping a puddle of water onto the linoleum, my lips blue and my eyes hollow. He didn't ask a single question. He didn't demand explanations or look at me with pity. He just threw the rag down, vaulted over the counter, and grabbed my arm. "Come here now," he commanded, his voice tight with concern. He led me through the back of the kitchen, past the hissing deep fryers and confused cooks, into a cramped, dusty storage room at the very back of the building. It was a windowless concrete box filled with towering stacks of spare tractor-trailer tires, boxes of industrial paper towels, and an old, ripped leather sofa that smelled faintly of mildew. Marcus stripped off his dry, oversized diner hoodie and threw it at me. "Put that on before you freeze to death," he ordered. He tossed me a blanket he pulled from a locker. I sat on the edge of that ruined sofa, pulling the hoodie over my shaking shoulders. The smell of the old rubber tires was overpowering, but in that moment, it was the greatest scent in the world. It meant I was out of the wind. "They took it all, Marcus," I whispered, my voice finally breaking. "Derek transferred my college fund. 15 grand. He framed me for the company cash. They threw me away." Marcus's jaw clenched. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a quiet, dangerous intensity. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly. "You stay right here," he said. "This is your room now. We figure this out tomorrow." For the next 18 days, I became a ghost. I lived entirely in the shadows of that windowless storage room, breathing in the heavy, suffocating scent of vulcanized rubber and old diner grease. That ripped leather sofa became my entire world. It was a humiliating, degrading existence, but it was survival. Marcus was my lifeline. He smuggled me leftover meatloaf, stale biscuits, and black coffee from the diner kitchen after his manager went home. I washed my face and brushed my teeth in the grimy employee restroom at 3 a.m. when the truck stop was completely empty. But I couldn't just hide forever. I still had my part-time job at the auto repair shop, and I knew that if I stopped showing up, I would truly lose the last shred of my identity. Every morning, I put on my still damp, oil-stained work clothes, snuck out the back door of the diner, and walked 3 miles to the garage. I slid under cars, turning wrenches until my knuckles bled, keeping my head down and my mouth shut. My boss noticed I looked like hell, but in our line of work, you don't ask questions unless the job doesn't get done. The psychological weight of those 18 days was heavier than any transmission I ever lifted. Every time my phone managed to hold a 10% charge from Marcus's wall outlet, I stared at the screen. I waited for a text, a missed call, an email, anything. I waited for my mother to break down and ask if I was at least alive. I waited for my father to demand I come home to face the music. But the screen remained devastatingly blank. Absolute, deafening silence. It was the silence of a family that had amputated a limb and felt no phantom pain. They had erased me with terrifying ease. The only news I got from the outside world came through vicious, second-hand rumors. A regular customer at the auto shop, a guy who knew my father from the local hardware store, casually mentioned it while I was changing his oil. "Hear your old man had a rough week," the guy said, leaning against the garage wall. I was paralyzed by the lack of proof. I knew Derek had wired the money, but I had no access to the bank to prove it was his IP address. I knew he took the cash, but I couldn't prove he was the one in the kitchen. I felt like a man buried alive, screaming into the dirt. What I didn't know, as I sat shivering in that tire room on the 18th night, was that Marcus had not been idle. Marcus had watched me shrink into a hollow shell of myself. He saw the injustice of it, and unlike my mother, he refused to just keep the peace. A few days earlier, while I was at the shop, he had gone through my heavy canvas bag. Tucked inside the zippered pocket of my wallet, he found an old, faded business card. It belonged to my grandfather, my father's dad, Arthur Hayes. I hadn't called Grandpa Arthur because I was paralyzed by shame. He was a formidable man, a retired corporate auditor and a man who understood contract law better than most attorneys. He had funded my father's business in the early days. He was sharp, unforgiving to liars, and commanded absolute respect. I couldn't bear the thought of him looking at me with the same disgust my father had. But Marcus didn't care about my pride. He cared about my survival. He dialed the number, introduced himself, and told my grandfather exactly where I was sleeping and exactly what I had been accused of. He lit the match and the explosion was coming. Grandpa Arthur did not call my parents. He didn't ask my father for his side of the story. He didn't send a warning text. When a man who spent 40 years hunting down corporate fraud and financial discrepancies hears that $15,000 has vanished alongside his grandson, he doesn't ask polite questions. He acts. He drove straight down from Raleigh, North Carolina, pushing his heavy sedan through the night. He arrived at the truck stop diner at 6 a.m. on the 19th day. I was sitting on the ripped leather sofa in the storage room, staring blankly at the concrete wall, sipping a lukewarm coffee Marcus had brought me. The heavy metal door to the storage room suddenly creaked open. The harsh fluorescent light from the hallway flooded in, blinding me for a second. When my vision cleared, my heart stopped. Standing in the doorway, wearing a crisp trench coat and a perfectly pressed suit, was Grandpa Arthur. He looked completely out of place among the grease drums and spare tires. He took one slow look around the miserable, windowless room. He looked at the makeshift bed on the sofa. He looked at the dark circles under my eyes, my oil-stained clothes, and the hollow gauntness of my cheeks. His face didn't show pity. It hardened into something resembling carved granite. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He walked in, pulled up a heavy wooden crate, and sat down directly across from me. He placed his gold-tipped cane between his knees, folded his hands over it, and fixed his piercing gray eyes on me. He didn't yell. He didn't ask why I hadn't called him. He just delivered a single, commanding directive in a voice that brooked no argument. "Start at the beginning, Caleb. Leave no detail out." So I did. I broke down and told him everything. My voice shook as I recounted the years of Derek's manipulation, the scratched bumper, the missing credit cards. I told him about the night of the storm. I told him about the $5,000 missing from the kitchen drawer. And then, I handed him my phone, pulled up the banking app showing the zero balance, and told him about the college fund. I told him about the wire transfer, the fake text message, and the fact that Derek was the only one in the house when I was in the shower. Grandpa Arthur listened in absolute silence. He stood up, adjusting the lapels of his coat. He looked down at me, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective fire that my own father had never shown me. "Your story makes sense, Caleb," Grandpa Arthur said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "His does not. Get up. Wash your face. We are leaving this room." He turned toward the metal door, his grip tightening on his cane. "The hunt begins," he whispered. The drive from the truck stop to my father's construction lot took less than 20 minutes. But sitting in the passenger seat of Grandpa Arthur's heavy sedan, it felt like an eternity. The morning sun was just beginning to burn off the remnants of the storm clouds, casting a harsh, unforgiving light across the wet Texas asphalt. I stared out the window, my stomach twisting into a tight, agonizing knot. Part of me was terrified. For 19 years, my father's word had been the absolute law of my universe. Defying him in his own territory felt like stepping into the cage with a starved lion. But when I glanced over at my grandfather, I saw a man who wasn't just unafraid. He was deeply, methodically furious. My father's company headquarters was a sprawling, fenced-in dirt lot on the industrial edge of town. It consisted of a large corrugated metal warehouse where materials were stored, flanked by a fleet of heavy-duty trucks, and a small, square, prefabricated building that served as the main office. When Grandpa Arthur pulled his sedan through the open chain-link gates, the workday was already in full swing. Diesel engines were rumbling, men were loading bundles of roofing shingles onto flatbeds, and the air smelled heavily of exhaust, damp earth, and cheap tobacco. Grandpa Arthur parked the car a short distance away from the main office. He didn't turn off the engine immediately. He sat there for a moment, his hands resting on the leather steering wheel, his eyes scanning the lot until he found exactly what he was looking for. There, standing near the loading dock, was my father. Richard Hayes was in his element. He was wearing his heavy work boots, a high-visibility vest over his flannel shirt, and a hard hat pushed back on his head. He was holding a clipboard, but he wasn't looking at it. Instead, he was standing in a circle with 3 of his senior foremen and a buddy from another local contracting firm. They all had coffee cups in their hands, and my father was holding court. Even from inside the car, with the windows rolled up, The sheer arrogance radiating from his posture made my blood run cold. He was gesturing wildly, laughing loudly, his chest puffed out with that trademark pride he always wore when he felt he had asserted his dominance. Grandpa Arthur turned the engine off. "Stay right behind me, Caleb," he instructed softly. "Do not speak until I tell you to. You are not the accused anymore. You are the witness." We stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under Grandpa Arthur's polished leather shoes. As we approached the group, the ambient noise of the lot seemed to fade away, replaced by the booming, boastful voice of my father. He was in the middle of a story, and as we got within earshot, the sickening reality of his words hit me like a physical blow. "I'm telling you, you can't show weakness," my father was saying, chuckling as he took a sip of his coffee. The kid thought he could pull a fast one. Thought he could fund his little habits under my roof. I kicked him out in the rain right then and there, tossed his garbage out the door. Maybe now the punk will learn respect. It's tough love, but that's how you build a man. The men around him nodded in solemn agreement, murmuring their approval at his strong, decisive parenting. Grandpa Arthur didn't slow his pace. He walked directly into the center of the circle, bypassing the foreman entirely. Before my father even registered our presence, Grandpa Arthur reached out and clamped his hand down on my father's broad shoulder. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was an iron grip, a physical manifestation of absolute authority. My father's laughter died instantly in his throat. The smug satisfaction evaporated from his face as he spun around, his eyes widening in pure shock. He looked at the impeccably dressed older man. Then his eyes darted to me, standing pale and ragged just a few steps behind. The color drained entirely from my father's weathered face. "Dad," my father stammered, his voice suddenly small and hollow, stripped of all its previous bravado. "Why are you here?" Grandpa Arthur's gray eyes locked onto his son. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was low, cold, and razor-sharp, carrying perfectly in the sudden, tense silence of the loading dock. "Because your son is sleeping on old tires in a truck stop," Grandpa Arthur stated, each word dripping with venom. "While your other son is spending a stolen college fund. We are going to your office. Now." The silence that followed Grandpa Arthur's command was deafening. The foreman quickly stepped back, awkwardly staring at the gravel, suddenly desperate to be anywhere else. My father stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to form a defense but couldn't find the oxygen. Without waiting for a response, Grandpa Arthur turned on his heel and strode toward the small, prefabricated office building, expecting my father to follow. After a humiliating second of hesitation, my father practically scurried after him, his heavy boots dragging in the dirt. I followed close behind, feeling the intense, burning stares of every worker on the lot. The interior of the office was exactly as I remembered it. Claustrophobic, smelling of stale coffee, ozone from the copy machine, and old blueprints. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with an irritating hum. My mother, Susan, was sitting at the front desk, frantically typing numbers into a billing spreadsheet. When the door opened and she saw Grandpa Arthur walk in, followed by me and a completely demoralized Richard, she physically recoiled. She pushed her rolling chair back so fast it hit the filing cabinet behind her with a loud clang. "Arthur, Caleb, what is going on?" she gasped, her hands flying to cover her mouth. She looked at my father for a cue, begging him silently to take control of the situation, but my father just stood by the door, staring at the floor tiles. "Sit down, Susan," Grandpa Arthur commanded, gesturing to the chair she had just vacated. He walked over to my father's heavy oak desk, pulled out the oversized leather chair, and sat down in it himself. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. He had just commandeered the entire company. "Call Derek. Tell him to get to this office immediately. Tell him his grandfather is waiting." My mother's hands shook so violently she dropped the phone receiver twice before she managed to dial Derek's number. She whispered a frantic message into the phone and hung up, looking utterly terrified. We waited in a suffocating, agonizing silence for 20 minutes. The air conditioner rattled in the window, but the room felt impossibly hot. My father paced in the small space between the desk and the door, sweating through his flannel shirt. I stood rigidly in the corner, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, trying to suppress the trembling in my legs. Finally, we heard the unmistakable, roaring exhaust of Derek's Ford F-250 pulling up right outside the office window. A moment later, the door swung open. Derek strolled in, holding a giant iced coffee, wearing expensive designer sunglasses and a fresh, crisp polo shirt. He looked like a man without a single care in the world. "Hey, Mom, what's the emergency?" I was right in the middle of... Derek started to say, his voice loud and arrogant. Then he saw Grandpa Arthur sitting behind the desk. He saw me standing in the corner. The cocksure smirk vanished from his face in a fraction of a second. He froze mid-step, his hand tightening around his plastic coffee cup so hard the lid popped off, spilling cold brown liquid onto the carpet. Grandpa Arthur leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk, interlacing his fingers. He didn't yell. He employed the terrifying, methodical tone of a man preparing to dissect a fraud. "Take off the sunglasses, Derek," he ordered softly. Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously, and slowly pulled the glasses off his face. His eyes were wide and darting around the room, looking for an exit strategy that didn't exist. "I have a few simple questions regarding the timeline of Thursday evening," Grandpa Arthur began, his eyes boring into Derek. "I want to know the exact time the deposit envelope was placed in the kitchen drawer. I want to know why a junior supervisor had unsupervised access to client cash. And, most importantly, I want you to explain the IP address logs from the bank server." My father immediately tried to intervene, his ego flaring up out of habit. "Dad, listen, this is my company. We handled the situation. The boy stole from us and I disciplined him. You don't need to come in here and interrogate my staff." Grandpa Arthur didn't even look at my father. He just raised one finger to silence him, a gesture so dismissive it made my father flinch. "I funded your first 2 trucks, Richard," Grandpa Arthur stated, his voice dropping an octave, radiating pure menace. "My name is still listed as a guarantor on your primary business credit line. I can freeze your assets by noon with one call to my lawyer. You will stand there, you will keep your mouth shut, and you will listen as I expose exactly what kind of man you have been protecting." The threat of financial ruin hung in the air like a guillotine. My father swallowed whatever pride he had left and clamped his mouth shut, stepping back until his shoulders hit the wall. The room belonged entirely to Grandpa Arthur now. He unbuttoned his trench coat, reached into his inner pocket, and pulled out a thick, manila folder. He dropped it onto the center of the oak desk with a heavy, satisfying thud. He opened it slowly, deliberately drawing out the suspense. "Let's look at the financial flow," Grandpa Arthur said, pulling out a sheet of paper. He slid it across the desk toward Derek. "This is a sworn statement and a cash receipt from a local custom auto shop. Dated Friday morning, barely 12 hours after the client deposit vanished from your kitchen. It shows a cash payment of exactly $4,800 for a suspension lift kit and custom rims for a 2024 Ford F-250. Signed by you, Derek." Derek stared at the receipt, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. I had money saved up," he stammered, his voice weak and unconvincing. "I've been saving for months. It's a coincidence." "Is it?" Grandpa Arthur asked mildly, not missing a beat. He pulled out a second document. "Because this is a subpoenaed overview of your personal checking and savings accounts for the last 6 months. Your balance has never exceeded $400. You have absolutely no record of cash withdrawals matching this amount. The money materialized out of thin air on the exact morning $5,000 went missing from the company drawer." My mother gasped, clutching the edge of her desk. She looked at Derek, her eyes pleading for him to have a reasonable explanation, but Derek was staring at the floor, sweating profusely. "But that is just petty theft," Grandpa Arthur continued, his tone turning noticeably darker. He pulled out a third stack of papers. This is a digital forensics report. Thursday night, Caleb's bank account was drained of $15,450 via an online wire transfer. The bank logs show the transfer was initiated using Caleb's mobile device, connected to the Hayes family home Wi-Fi network. At that exact time, Caleb's time card shows he had just clocked out of the garage, and GPS data from his phone shows he had just arrived home. He was in the shower. You, Derek, were the only other person in the house. Derek's breathing became ragged. He did it himself. He sent that text message. You saw the text, Dad. Derek pleaded, looking desperately at our father. Grandpa Arthur didn't let my father answer. He pulled a small silver USB drive from his pocket. He reached over to my mother's laptop, plugged it in, and turned the screen so both my parents and Derek could see it clearly. A text message can be typed by anyone holding the phone, Grandpa Arthur said. But this requires no interpretation. Caleb's friend, Marcus, works at the truck stop. He provided this security footage from the back parking lot, taken 3 nights ago. He clicked play. The video was grainy, shot under the harsh glare of a sodium street lamp, but the audio was crystal clear. It showed Derek leaning against his freshly lifted truck, smoking a cigarette, talking to a guy I vaguely recognized from high school. The audio crackled, and then Derek's arrogant, bragging voice filled the small office. Nah, man, I'm completely in the clear. The digital Derek laughed, taking a drag of his cigarette. The old man lost his mind, threw the kid out in the freezing rain, didn't even check the bank statements. I moved the 15 grand to the sportsbookie's offshore account, took the cash from the kitchen, and blamed it all on Caleb. It was too easy. He is gone because they believe anything I say. The video ended. The silence in the room was so profound I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My mother let out a strangled, agonizing wail and covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. My father stared at the frozen frame of the video on the laptop screen, his jaw hanging open, his eyes wide with a horrified, shattered realization. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire religion burn to the ground. Derek's bravado completely collapsed. His knees gave out, and he slumped into the chair opposite the desk. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I was desperate, he sobbed, his voice high-pitched and pathetic. I owed the bookies so much money. They were going to hurt me, Dad. I didn't have a choice. I was just going to borrow it. I swear. He looked up, tears streaming down his face, a mask of pure, cowardly panic. The golden child was finally exposed as the parasite he truly was. For a long moment, nobody moved. The air in the office felt dense, heavy with the stench of betrayal and shattered illusions. Then, my father did the most predictable, cowardly thing a man of his nature could do when faced with his own catastrophic failure. His ego, desperately trying to survive the total annihilation of its reality, lashed out at the only target it was used to hitting. He whipped his head around, his eyes locking onto me, and shouted, "Why didn't you explain? Why did you just stand there and let me kick you out if you had this proof? You should have fought harder." It was the reflex of a broken man trying to shift the blame, to somehow make his cruelty my fault. Grandpa Arthur didn't let me answer. He brought his heavy gold-tipped cane down hard onto the oak desk. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot in the cramped room, making my father jump back. He did explain, Grandpa Arthur roared, his voice finally losing its cold control and exploding with raw, protective fury. He begged you. He stood in your kitchen and told you the truth, and you chose not to listen. You chose to believe a fabricated text message over your own son's tears. You threw a 19-year-old boy out into a severe weather warning with no money, no coat, and no dignity, simply because it was easier than admitting your oldest son is a criminal. My father shrank back against the wall, physically diminished, his broad shoulders slouching. He had absolutely nothing to say. The truth had cornered him, and there were no more lies left to hide behind. Grandpa Arthur stood up, towering over the desk. He looked down at Derek, who was still weeping into his hands, offering no pity. "Here are the consequences," Grandpa Arthur stated, his voice returning to that icy, methodical calm. "Derek, you are terminated from this company immediately. You will clear out your desk and surrender your company keys right now. You will sell that truck by the end of the week. Every single cent from the sale, plus whatever high-interest loans you have to take out, will go toward refunding the client deposit and completely restoring Caleb's college fund. If you miss a single payment or if you refuse, I will personally hand this USB drive, the bank logs, and a sworn affidavit to the district attorney and press charges for wire fraud and grand larceny. You will go to federal prison. Do you understand me?" Derek could only nod frantically, his face buried in his hands, terrified and utterly broken. Grandpa Arthur then turned his gaze to my father. "As for you, Richard, you have proven yourself entirely incapable of managing truth, let alone a business. You will retain ownership of this company in name only. Starting Monday, an independent accounting firm of my choosing will take over all financial oversight. Every invoice, every deposit, every single outgoing check will require 2 signatures. You have lost your absolute authority." My father looked like he had been physically struck. Losing control of his money, having someone looking over his shoulder, it was the ultimate humiliation for a man whose entire identity was built on being the undisputed boss. But he knew he had no leverage. He gave a slow, defeated nod. Finally, Grandpa Arthur walked around the desk and stood directly in front of my father. The anger had faded from the old man's eyes, replaced by a deep, profound disappointment that was somehow much worse. He looked at his son, the man who had caused so much destruction just to protect his own ego, and asked one final, devastating question. "Were you protecting your son, Richard? Or were you protecting the lie that made you feel powerful?" The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I had ever experienced. My father's lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked at the floor, his face flushed with a shame so deep it seemed to age him 10 years in a matter of seconds. He had no answer, because answering would require an honesty he simply did not possess. Grandpa Arthur didn't wait for a reply. He turned to me, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and said, "We are done here, Caleb. Let's go home." I didn't look back as we walked out the door. The Texas sun was bright now, drying up the puddles on the gravel lot. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy chains of their expectations, their blame, and their lies had finally been shattered. I didn't go back to the house in Texas. That fact surprised my parents more than anything else. I think, in their twisted, conditioned minds, they truly believed that exposing Derek's crimes would serve as a magical reset button. They expected that once the villain was caught, I would simply pack my heavy canvas bag, walk back through the front door, accept a tearful apology, and resume my position at the dinner table. They thought the truth would simply erase the trauma. But the truth doesn't unlock a door that was bolted against you in a storm. It doesn't dry the clothes that froze to your skin. It certainly doesn't make a son forget the absolute disgust in his father's eyes as he threw him away like garbage. Instead of returning to that house, I got into the passenger seat of Grandpa Arthur's sedan, and we drove east, leaving Texas and all its toxic memories behind. We drove all the way to Raleigh, North Carolina. Grandpa Arthur owned a modest, beautiful property with a large, detached structure in the back. It used to be a carriage house, but he had converted it into a spacious woodshop and storage garage years ago. It had concrete floors, high rafters, a small bathroom, and enough space to park 2 vehicles. He moved his woodworking tools to one side, set up a comfortable cot, a mini fridge, and a desk for me in the corner, and handed me the keys to the heavy sliding doors. "It isn't a mansion, Caleb," he said, handing me a fresh cup of coffee on my first morning there. "But it is yours. No one will ever kick you out of this room." The first few nights in Raleigh, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept waking up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, listening intently for the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs, waiting for the inevitable shout, the false accusation, the impending punishment. The sheer, uninterrupted quiet of the garage terrified me at first. But slowly, over the course of a few weeks, my nervous system began to downregulate. The quiet stopped feeling like a trap waiting to be sprung, and started feeling like oxygen. Grandpa Arthur didn't just give me a place to live. He helped me rebuild my foundation. He forced Derek, under threat of immediate imprisonment, to wire the stolen $15,450 back into a new, secure account that only I controlled. When the money hit my account, I sat at my small desk and wept. I had my college fund back. I had my future back. But I didn't want to just sit around waiting for the semester to start. I needed to work with my hands. Grandpa Arthur understood. He gave me a small personal loan with a strict, formal repayment contract because he wanted me to feel the pride of earning my way, to buy a basic set of professional automotive tools. I started putting flyers up around the neighborhood, offering honest, reliable mobile mechanic services. It started small. Brake pad replacements, oil changes, replacing alternator belts. But people quickly realized I was meticulous, honest, and charged fair rates. Word of mouth spread. Soon, the carriage house garage was constantly occupied by classic cars and beat-up daily drivers alike. One afternoon, I was elbow-deep in the engine bay of a beautiful, rusted 1968 Mustang, trying to coax the carburetor back to life. My hands were covered in black grease, my knuckles were scraped, and I smelled strongly of gasoline. I wiped my brow with the back of my arm, leaving a dark smudge across my forehead. Grandpa Arthur walked into the garage, leaning on his cane, watching me work. The engine suddenly roared to life, a beautiful, throaty rumble that filled the high rafters. I smiled, a genuine ear-to-ear grin that I hadn't felt in years. "You look happy, Caleb," Grandpa Arthur noted, a rare, warm smile touching his eyes. I looked down at my filthy hands, the hands my father had so viciously mocked. The hands, he said, would never build a legacy. "I am, Grandpa," I replied, grabbing a rag. "These greasy hands are paying for my tuition next month. They're building exactly what I want." For the first time in my 19 years, I wasn't the family scapegoat. I wasn't a problem to be solved or a trash can for someone else's failures. I was Caleb Hayes. I was a mechanic. I was a future engineer. I was finally, truly myself. Fan 13 How Qua Dai Dang Tai K Na 722 while I was building a new life among the pine trees and engine blocks in Raleigh. The consequences of that fateful storm were slowly but relentlessly dismantling the illusions back in Texas. Grandpa Arthur kept tabs on the situation through his lawyers and the independent accountant he had installed, and occasionally, he would share the grim updates with me over dinner. Real consequences, I learned, are rarely as swift and dramatic as they are in movies. They are slow, grinding, and deeply humiliating. Derek's life fell apart with pathetic speed. He was forced to sell his beloved, fully loaded Ford F-250 for a fraction of its value just to quickly appease the bookies and make the first restitution payment to my college fund. Without his flashy truck, his company credit card, and his fabricated title of junior supervisor, the illusion of his success evaporated. Furthermore, word travels fast in the tight-knit community of local contractors. Everyone knew why he had been suddenly fired by his own father. He became radioactive. No reputable construction firm would hire a guy known for embezzling client deposits and framing his own brother. Last I heard, the golden child of the Hayes family was working the late shift at a fast food drive-thru on the highway, wearing a polyester uniform, trying to scrape together enough minimum wage hours to pay off the exorbitant interest on the loans he took to stay out of jail. The friends who used to laugh with him and drink on his dime completely vanished when the money dried up and the story stopped being funny. My father suffered a different kind of purgatory. He didn't lose his house or his business overnight, but he lost the one thing he valued above all else: his pride. The independent accountant Grandpa Arthur hired was merciless. Every time my father wanted to buy supplies, approve a payroll bonus, or even take a client out to lunch, he had to submit a requisition form and wait for approval. Worse yet, he had to make the phone calls. He had to personally call the clients whose deposits had been compromised, including the man whose $5,000 Derek had stolen, and explain the new payment security protocols the company was adopting. He had to swallow his massive ego and apologize to the men he used to boast to. Everyone in town knew that Richard Hayes had been completely blinded by his own arrogance, that he had fiercely protected a thief while throwing an innocent son out into the street. The respect he had commanded for decades was replaced by quiet pity and thinly veiled contempt. He was a king locked in a very small, very embarrassing cage of his own making. My mother tried to reach out to me. About 2 months after I moved to Raleigh, she found out my new email address from Grandpa Arthur. The first email she sent was a sprawling, chaotic mess of text. It was over 1,000 words long, filled with desperate justifications. She wrote about how stressed they were, how convincing Derek had sounded, how the storm had made everyone crazy, and how she was just a mother trying to keep the peace in a volatile house. She asked for my understanding. She asked for grace. I read it once, felt absolutely nothing, and deleted it. I didn't reply. 3 weeks later, a second email arrived. This one was entirely different. There were no excuses. There was no attempt to share the blame with the weather or my father's temper. It was just one single, solitary sentence. I should have opened the door. I sat at my small desk in the garage, staring at those 7 words glowing on the screen. I read them 10, 20, 30 times. The walls of my heart, which I had built up so high and thick to survive the trauma, suddenly cracked. I leaned forward, buried my face in my hands, and cried. I cried for the scared, freezing 19-year-old boy who had stood on that porch, waiting for a mother's love that never came. I didn't cry because I forgave her. Forgiveness is a bridge I wasn't ready, and might never be ready, to build. I cried because, after years of gaslighting and silence, she had finally, accurately named the exact thing that had broken me. She should have opened the door, but she didn't, and that fact would stand between us forever. The final meeting happened exactly 5 months after the storm. Grandpa Arthur arranged it, but he insisted it happen on neutral ground. We met in the polished, sterile conference room of his attorney's office in downtown Raleigh. I didn't have to go. My money had been returned, the business was under control, and I was safely enrolled in my engineering classes. Grandpa Arthur told me that closure wasn't a debt I owed them. But I wanted to go. I needed to speak my piece in a room where nobody had the power to throw me out for telling the truth. They arrived together. When they walked into the conference room, the physical transformation was shocking. My father, Richard, looked remarkably smaller. The broad-shouldered, booming patriarch was gone, replaced by an aging man with deep lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. My mother walked behind him, clutching her purse tightly, her eyes red and puffy. Derek came in last. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting button-down shirt. He didn't strut. He shuffled, keeping his eyes glued to the mahogany table, looking utterly defeated. I sat across from them, wearing a clean shirt, my hands calloused but scrubbed free of grease. I sat tall, my back straight. Grandpa Arthur sat beside me, but he remained silent. This was my floor. I looked at the 3 of them, the people who were supposed to be my safe harbor. The money is back, I started, my voice calm, steady, and devoid of the desperation they were used to hearing from me. The accounts are settled. But I wanted you here today so you could understand exactly what you broke, and why it can never be fixed. I looked directly at my father. He tried to hold my gaze, but his eyes quickly dropped. The hardest part wasn't the freezing rain, Dad, I said. It wasn't even the fact that Derek lied. The hardest part was how incredibly easy it was for you to believe I deserved to be thrown away. You didn't need evidence. You didn't need bank statements. You only needed a story that made me look guilty and him look hurt, because that's the narrative you've always wanted. My mother let out a quiet sob, pressing a tissue to her mouth. I turned my attention to Derek. He flinched slightly. You, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You always thought the game ended the moment you escaped trouble. You only thought about winning. You never thought about where I would sleep in the rain. You never thought about what it does to a person to lose their home because of your greed." Derek's shoulders shook, and genuine tears began to fall down his face. "I'm so sorry, Caleb," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." I watched him cry, but I felt no urge to comfort him. His tears were no longer my responsibility. My mother reached across the wide mahogany table, her hand trembling. "Caleb, please," she begged, her voice thick with desperation. "Please come home. We can go to family therapy. We can start over. Please." I looked at her outstretched hand. I didn't reach back. "No," I said quietly, but with absolute finality. My father looked up, his face contorted in pain. "You're just going to turn your back on your blood?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Blood doesn't grant you access to my life when you treated my existence like a problem to be solved," I replied smoothly. I stood up, pushing my chair back. I looked at all three of them one last time. Family should be the place where truth is protected, not the place where lies are rewarded. The boy who stood on that porch begging for your approval died in the storm. I'm not going back to be him ever again. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the conference room, Grandpa Arthur following quietly behind me. We stepped out of the heavy glass doors of the law firm and onto the bustling Raleigh sidewalk. The midday sun was brilliant, warming my face. I walked over to the street where I had parked my car, the 1968 Mustang I had bought as a rusted shell and rebuilt with my own two hands. The engine turned over with a powerful, confident roar. I pulled out into the traffic, the windows rolled down, the wind blowing through the cabin. The storm hadn't destroyed me. It had simply washed away the lie that I needed them to survive. And now the road ahead was entirely mine.
We on? Check, check. Fine, man. Took me 15 minutes to figure out that my mic didn't have a mic on. It's fun.